It was one of those slow, in-between afternoons when nothing feels urgent, but everything still asks for a little attention. I had gone out to pick up a few things, walk a little, and enjoy the kind of day that does not seem to be in a hurry either. The street was calm. A few people passed by with shopping bags or coffee cups in hand. Someone was pushing a stroller. Someone else stood outside a shop looking at a phone with complete concentration. It was the kind of ordinary scene that feels almost invisible while you are inside it. I stopped at a small bakery to buy something simple. Nothing special. Just bread, maybe, or a small pastry if the glass case looked convincing enough. Inside, it was warm and smelled like butter and coffee and the quiet comfort of people choosing treats. There was a short line. Not long enough to matter. Just enough time to look around, decide what looked good, and listen to the soft rhythm of the room. The bell above the door rang once or twice. Paper bags rustled. A pair of tongs tapped lightly against a tray. When it was my turn, I stepped forward, ordered what I wanted, and followed along carefully. So far, everything was fine. Very fine, in fact. The person at the counter was friendly. The words were simple. The whole exchange felt easy in that pleasant way that can make you careless. She placed my pastry into a paper bag, folded the top neatly, and handed it toward me. Then she said something. Quickly, but kindly. One of those little phrases people say at the end of a transaction, when hands are moving and attention is split between money, bags, and the next person in line. I did not catch the words. Not fully. Only the shape of them. The tone was light. The timing felt familiar. And somehow, before meaning had arrived, my mouth reached forward with its usual polite confidence and said, "You're welcome." Too soon. Much too soon. Because no one had thanked me. Not yet. Not even accidentally. I had offered the answer before the moment had earned it, as if my politeness had entered the room a few seconds early and sat in the wrong chair. The woman behind the counter paused for the smallest moment. Not enough to turn it into a problem. Just enough for me to hear myself properly. Then she smiled in that calm, forgiving way people sometimes do when they realize they have just witnessed a tiny human misfire. And that was when my mind hurried back to check the scene. Bag. Counter. Card machine. Bakery. No thank you. No gratitude. No reason at all for your welcome to have appeared so confidently in public. I felt the moment open around me in that very familiar way. Not a disaster. Not even really an embarrassment yet. Just a slight shift in the air, where one wrong phrase suddenly becomes visible and stands there waiting to be acknowledged. So I laughed. Softly at first. Then with a little more honesty. "Oh, sorry," I said. "I think I answered too early." Which was true. It was not the whole story, perhaps, but it was the most useful part to offer out loud. That made her laugh too. Not loudly. Just enough to let the moment relax. Then she said, "I only asked if you needed a receipt." Of course. A receipt. A practical question. A bakery question. A completely innocent sentence that had somehow become a social event. I shook my head, still smiling. No receipt, thank you. This time the words matched the moment. This time they belonged. And it was oddly satisfying how peaceful a sentence feels when it arrives in the correct place. She handed me the bag again, or maybe she had never stopped handing it to me. Either way, the transaction continued as if nothing much had happened at all. That helped. So did the fact that the pastry smelled warm and the room stayed gentle, and no one behind me seemed especially interested in my conversational timing. I stepped aside, made room for the next customer, and stood for a second near the window to put away my wallet. The whole thing was already softening. That was the nice part. A moment can feel bright while you are inside it, but once it begins to pass, it often loses its sharp edges quickly. Outside, the air felt cooler than it had before. I held the small paper bag in one hand and started walking slowly down the street. Somewhere behind me, the bakery door opened again. The bell rang once more. A bicycle passed. The afternoon kept moving without asking for any explanation. And as I walked, the whole thing became funny in a quieter way. Not because it was such a huge mistake, but because it was such a recognizable one. The kind that happens when your mind grabs the outline of a moment and fills it in before listening is finished. That is sometimes what living in another language feels like. You are not always lost. Often you are almost right. Close enough to sound confident. Close enough to keep moving. And every now and then, close enough to thank yourself before anyone else does. By the time I got to the corner, I was smiling again. The pastry was still warm. The street was still quiet. And somewhere behind me, in a bakery that smelled like butter and coffee, a woman had asked about a receipt and briefly received a very enthusiastic "You're welcome."